No, that's huge. Now, in the book, one of the people that you'd interviewed is David Becker. He's a president of the branding agency Philippe Becker. And he says, and I quote, it's a very interesting quote, "If you do what is prescribed, you're not going to do anything big." So, Rob, let me ask you, do you think that too many entrepreneurs today kind of fall into the trap of doing what's prescribed?
I can say without a doubt, yes. They're looking for a blueprint. A lot of entrepreneurs that are up and coming and small business owners are looking for that absolute roadmap. I'm not saying you shouldn't have a business plan and put it together and be appropriate, but sometimes they're looking at the other guy just a little too much. Maybe I need to build the next best widget or the next best this, and they're not thinking, and I hate to say this, it's going to come out awful, outside of the box. They're doing what they've been told to do. And what I found throughout this book, the people that did exactly the opposite of what they were prescribed to do or told to do have been the most successful entrepreneurs in America. Let's look at Steve Jobs. Even though he's Steve Jobs and, he created Apple, I recently just finished his book, which, by the way, was fantastic. And you really got to see an insight of what a dreamer and what a real doer is. Mm-hmm. You might not like and want to sit and have dinner with that guy, but you can't say that he didn't create something out of nothing. He created the demand for his products and services where it never existed before. That is a true visionary. There are small business owners throughout my book that have done the same exact thing that you've never heard of.
Going against what's prescribed, though.
Going against what's prescribed. I mean, I think it's a big, important part of being an entrepreneur and taking risks to be successful in America.
Do you think, though, I mean, when one uses the word entrepreneur, the word maverick comes to mind, or not to say rebel, but, you really have to kind of go to the beat of your own drum. Do you think because of the current economy and the uncertainty that entrepreneurs feel a little more comfortable going with what's prescribed?
Well, I think it's easy to fall back into something that's comfortable. But, let's take a step back. Let's look at our warring political parties. Let's look at the misinformation in the marketplace. I can even look at most recently here in the tri-state area, actually right on Long Island. They reported not a handful of months ago that we were losing jobs. And then all of a sudden they revise all the numbers and we gain jobs. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. We're all living our lives and running our businesses based on this information that's coming to us, and it was wholly inaccurate. And that's the problem. Sometimes you fall into the trap of paying attention to all these other indicators and not just doing what you think is the right thing to do. And these stories play out through the book, through every single one of the individuals, about letting go and realizing that sometimes you've got the opportunity to do really, really well. And sometimes you've got to take a look at your assets and say, hey, this is not working. It's not going where, and you have to cut your losses and be that type of person to say, I've tried everything I can try and it's over.
Right.
Not saying, just one more day, just one more day. Sometimes that works, but the smart one realizes when time is up, it's time to cut the cord.
Right. Yeah, you got to put the emotion aside and make the right decision. And folks, you're listening to the Profit Express right here on 88.7 FM WRHU, and today's guest is Rob Basso. And he's the author of the new book, The Everyday Entrepreneur. And as I read the book myself, folks, to me, it's just a very relatable book because so many of the listeners to the Profit Express are, not to rip off Rob's title, but hey, we are everyday entrepreneurs. And it's not being unable to relate to the Apple stories and the Facebook stories, but stories of entrepreneurs right here on Long Island and around the country. So, again, thanks so much for being on board today. Now, Rob, in my intro, I talked a little bit about something you called your no worries in sight belief system. That really kind of caught my attention. Talk to us about that.
Well, it's funny, and I'll tell all the listeners, as soon as Tim brought that up, I'm like, did I actually write that? And I did, but you know what? The reason I didn't recall it, even though it's really at the beginning of one of the first chapters, was because really it was another way to say, my naivete really helped me succeed in business. I just didn't know any better. I didn't think that it was impossible to do anything. I woke up every morning saying, I'm going to get there. I'm going to do it this way. I'm going to do it that way. And I failed miserably a lot of the time along the way. But the reality was having these no worries in sight attitude was, listen, I'm not going to let these hurdles get in my way. Here's a good example. I don't know if everybody's heard this story. Lolo Jones was a professional hurdler, and she was phenomenal. She ran for LSU. She was in the last Olympics, favored to win. She killed everybody in all her races. And there it was, the finals. She hit a hurdle. She hit the third hurdle and lost, didn't medal at all. And she is coming back stronger than ever for the Olympics this year, for the trials that are happening in June. She is the perfect example of this no worries in sight attitude. She didn't let that setback hurt her. She said, I am more determined than ever to be the champion that I know that I can be. It's the same thing in business. Olympic athletes and entrepreneurs have a ton in common.
That's actually a great story. It's a great analogy, by the way, too. How important is it for an entrepreneur to know and to understand what their level of risk is?
Well, it's vital, and I think it changes throughout your career. If you look at my situation, when I started my business, I was about 23 years old, and I didn't have much to lose. I maybe had $10,000 in my pocket, and fortunately found a business partner who was willing to fund my operation. And we're still great partners today, amazingly so. My penchant for risk was much greater then than it actually is now. I'm actually more cautious the more successful my businesses and organizations have become, because it's not because I have a fear of failure. It's because I've realized that there are certain risks that I'm unwilling to take.
Sure.
I've got a family. I've got a mortgage. I've got 50 people that work for my organization. I've got bigger responsibilities.
Right.
So my risk and tolerance for it has changed dramatically. And I think too many entrepreneurs risk it all the time. And that is a recipe for failure in my book. Other entrepreneurs will tell you, and successful ones, oh, I failed 4 times. I lost everything 4 times until I hit my big one. Okay, if you want to live like a pauper for 15 years, that's fine. But most entrepreneurs, and especially the everyday entrepreneurs that I write about in the book, aren't willing to do that. And that's okay. It doesn't make you less of an entrepreneur.
Sure,
Not everybody's going to be Bill Gates or Steve Jobs.
Well, it's also knowing your own level of risk, as you said, is key. But also, what I just kind of heard you saying there is, it's going to change throughout the career, throughout your business. Like you said, hey, when we're all young and dumb and we don't have a whole lot to lose, we're willing to roll those dice a little bit more. That was actually a very good point. Now, so talking about risk and how key that is, another thing you talked a lot about in the book is resourcefulness being a real key to success. I'd like to ask you, what was in your opinion, one of the most resourceful things that you did to get Advantage Payroll kind of off the ground in the beginning?
I surrounded myself with people that I knew could influence the growth of my business. It was that simple. And I don't think it was a conscious thought. I said, here I am knowing very little about running a business, but other people do. Other people are very successful. And I looked to the outside world and realized I didn't have all the answers. I never pretended I had all the answers. So I went and I found people that could help me do what I needed to do. And I didn't even know half of what I needed to do. And that's when I found my business partner at Advantage. I actually sold him payroll services when I worked for my previous employer. I knocked on his door in Long Beach, New York. He owned a security...
Great story in the book, by the way.
Oh, well, maybe I won't give the whole thing away, but the short of it is I knocked on his door and I was relentless until he let me in, and he let me in, and we're not only great friends, but great partners for 15 years, and that rarely happens in today's economy.
Absolutely. So it's just surrounding yourself with the key people who actually know how to do it.
To me, it's been the most important thing that I've done, and that's part of the reason that I hired my mom when I first started the business. I could trust her. I knew I could rely on her, not for her business acumen, but for the simple fact that I knew that she wasn't going to do anything to damage me or the business.